So good afternoon all, and thank you very much for joining us today to the Dial Global Virtual Workshop, where every week we bring you cross-sector business leaders sharing their stories about diversity and inclusion and case studies on making our world a better place. This week we are joined by Paul Wright, who is the Head of Inclusion and Sustainability at the Bank of England. Paul will be sharing with us why inclusion is a key priority to the bank and what they have done so far and what their future plans hold. Paul will share a case study with us for about 30 minutes and then we will go into a Q&A with him. Feel free to drop us questions over the live chat, or you can text me or send me a LinkedIn message and we will get on to questions a little bit later on. I'm going to hand over to Paul in a moment. Paul will introduce himself, share with us why he's so passionate about diversity and inclusion. He'll tell us a little bit more about himself, and then we'll go straight into the case study and we'll come back to the Q&A shortly. So Paul, handing over to you.
Thanks, Meenakshi. Just want to say I'm really excited to be here. It's all a bit weird though. I was saying to Meenakshi, the only experience I have of Zoom is doing a virtual quiz. So let's see how we get on. Before we started, I thought it'd be useful just to talk a little bit about how we've been affected by COVID-19 at the bank in the D&I space. It's fair to say that the focus has shifted from diversity to our well-being community aspects, particularly how we work with our charities, because some of them are facing difficulties. So well-being of our staff, and I'm sure for your organisations, is paramount. So we've been working really hard to make sure we're getting some support out there for everybody, whether it be psychological, financial aspects of what they need. And the other thing that we've realised is that, just as with everything else in the D&I world, when it comes to people's well-being, you can't really put people into groups. We started looking at those who were on the vulnerable list according to the NHS and looking at those who lived alone. But then we quickly realised that there are some people who are actually thriving working from home, being on their own, because they've been taken out of an environment where they're not able to thrive. So we've seen some interesting stories coming out. And the other thing we're doing is we're keeping a tally of everything that's going on, that's changing. And that we might want to do again in future. So flexible working, we've been a great advocate of that for some time. But it's been brought to the fore now that really people can work from home, regardless of what job they're doing. So that's been good. Right, I should tell you a little bit about me, shouldn't I, before we crack on? So I'm Paul Wright. I've worked at the Bank of England since around about 2013. I've been in this role coming up a year. Before that, I worked as a Deputy Chief Operating Officer for one of our business units within the bank. Had a lot of responsibility around the people aspect of that, and was in charge of the D&I plan for that actual business area. About 15 months ago, I was asked to go on secondment to HR to do a little caretaking role in their talent acquisition area. And while I was there, the inclusion and sustainability role became vacant. They asked me if I'd step in while they found somebody permanent, but I took to it like a duck to water, and been doing it permanently since last October. So talk about being in the right place at the right time. So that's a little bit about me. A little bit about the Bank of England. It employs around about 4,500 staff. While Threadneedle Street is recognised as our main location, we have another office in London, plus ones in Devon, Essex, and Leeds, as well as some small regional offices. So that's a little bit of background. So while we're here, as Meenakshi said, I'm going to talk about another 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. Meenakshi has covered what I'm going to be talking about, but while I'm talking, it would be great if you could think about what you have in place already when it comes to the socio-economic makeup of your organisation, the plans you have for the future, which will include challenges that you face and how you get engagement across all levels of your organisation. So let's crack on. So why is this topic important to the bank? Fundamentally, it's because we don't want to restrict our talent pipeline. Our mission is to promote the good of the people of the United Kingdom by maintaining monetary and financial stability. And we believe that to do this, the bank must represent the UK population. So we need to ensure that we can build that robust pipeline to attract and retain people from a variety of backgrounds. So what's our ultimate aim? Well, if we get this right, it will go a long way to continue the shift in the bank having a truly inclusive culture. I describe it as we become an organisation that fits around the individual rather than the individual feeling they have to fit into the bank. And that means that we'll all have the opportunity to thrive. Why is social mobility important to me? In the D&I space, we all have a story to share. So briefly give you mine. I come from a working class background, growing up in council housing. My dad was, amongst other things, a lorry driver. My mum worked as a dinner lady in my pre-teen years. I left school after my O-levels. Yes, I am that old. A last minute decision, as I was all set to do A-levels. As it turned out, I didn't do brilliantly in my O-levels anyway, so it may have been the right decision at the time. And the thought of higher education didn't enter my mind. It's not something that people in my family did. So I worked in retail from the age of 16, going to an evening class to get an extra O-level so I could complete a day release course in business studies. Working in the shop, I got to know a few of the Saturday staff, many of whom were studying for their A-levels before going off to uni or poly in those polytechnics in those days. And some friends within my social circle were heading off to uni too. I felt I was missing out. I guess you could call it early FOMO. So I thought, why not do it for myself? And so I went back into full-time education at the age of 22, terrifyingly called a mature student, but it did mean that I got a full grant. Fast forward a number of years, and I'm now working at the Bank of England. And even if you'd asked me 10 years ago, could I see someone like me working there, I probably would have said no. But more about that later on. So let's get back to what's going on at the bank. One area where we're already active is our work experience programme. It focuses on opportunities to young people from the local community who don't have a personal connection to the bank. Just to recap, so our work experience programme, we work with several partner organisations. We've had about 260 students join us over the last 3 years. And by working through those partner organisations, we ensure that we give opportunities to young people from across London. Around a quarter have been from Tower Hamlets, one of London's more deprived boroughs, despite having the city on its doorstep and Canary Wharf being located there. Another area where we're already active is through our outreach programme to schools. This helps boost public understanding and build public trust in the bank. And we've developed an education programme for school-aged children to equip them with the knowledge and tools they need to engage with the economy and the bank. Just a little quick insight. There was I was at a socioeconomic discussion before the lockdown, and they were showing the story about a school, I think it was in Denmark, where a class of 7-year-olds were asked to draw pictures of, from memory, I think it was a pilot, somebody who was in the fire service, and a soldier. And of the, say, I don't know, there's 12 children, those 3 pictures, so you'd expect, what, 36 pictures, and all but 3 of them were pictures of men. So even at that early age, you've got an ingrained sense of what people look like in certain professions. So that's why this outreach programme is really important. So we can try and get to children at an age where we can really sort of expand what their expectations of what they can get from life might be. We also focus on state schools. We're trying to link our contact database to the National Schools database, which will give us much more information on the schools requesting visits, enable us to better target those most in need. This is work in progress, but ultimately we want to ensure we focus on the children who are most in need of access to us. Diversity of social background touches on other elements of our D&I agenda. Issues on intersectionality come to the fore, and just as some of the key D&I initiatives are driven by other programmes, so this work will drive and shift our D&I agenda. One quick example is our BAME task force. We set this up last year to help address the issues we were seeing with our BAME colleagues in terms of career progression and retention. The task force oversees a number of initiatives, including developing an inclusive leadership programme. We're hoping that that programme will have a positive impact on all colleagues' lived experience at the bank, not just our BAME colleagues. So that's just one example of where you, and you'll know this, you have one initiative that's to help in one particular demographic, that spread goes wider than that. On a broader scale, social mobility has been largely stagnant in the UK since 2014, and research shows that those from more privileged backgrounds are likely to go to Russell Group universities, obtain professional managerial jobs, and get paid more once enrolled. And at the bank, we have not been immune to these issues of social mobility. To put this into context, there's some bank-specific research done, and that found that senior staff and graduates tend to come from higher SEBs. So put it into a little bit more context, let's go a bit more granular. 21% of our graduate respondents and around 30% of senior respondents were educated privately, compared to just 7% of the wider population. And another 15% of graduates and 21% of seniors attended a selective state school, compared to 5.2% of the UK. And then less than half of both groups were educated at non-selective state schools, and 60 to 70% of both groups class themselves as coming from a mid-high or high socioeconomic background. So let's bring us up to date. So we've had a real upsurge in activity over the last 9 months or so, but what's brought that on? There have been a few key events that have aligned themselves beautifully. As part of our graduate intake, our grads undertake a central banking qualification, which culminates in writing a dissertation of their choice. One of our grads, Amy, wanted a better understanding of the social economic background of the bank, and her paper included research by Sam Friedman, and the stats I've touched on form part of her research. And I'm sure she won't mind me sharing that the main reason she wanted to do this is she's from London, one of the poorer boroughs, and when she joined the bank, she could see there were a lot of females in senior positions, but when she scratched beneath the surface a little bit, she couldn't find anybody that she could identify. So she just wanted to get a bit more of a clearer insight into what the makeup of the bank looked like. So I mentioned that part of her research was carried out by Dr. Sam Friedman, and I'll loop back to him in a second. So Amy was put in touch with me to see what we could do with her research. And it just so happened that shortly afterwards, I was at a roundtable discussion with Dr. Sam, who was sharing insights from his book, The Class Ceiling, Why It Pays to Be Privileged. Happened to be the day before I was flying off for a long weekend. And it's a great book. I actually took it, and it's my holiday reading. So it's that easy to read. So if you haven't already read it, I thoroughly recommend it. Anyway, I was captivated by the work that Sam had done, and took a punt and asked if he'd give a presentation at the bank. Not only did he agree, but we found a date during National Inclusion Week last September. Originally, it was going to be fairly low-key, scheduled as an event for about 30 or 40 people. Then a few weeks later, I was giving our chair, Brad Freed, an overview of events that were taking place during National Inclusion Week. The event with Sam came up, and Brad shared his story with me about his upbringing, which was fascinating. So much so that I took a punt and asked Brad if he'd host an event with Sam. He happened to be free and agreed. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I'm having a chat with our chief economist, Andy Haldane, about D&I more broadly, and his passion for the subject of different backgrounds came over so strong. I asked if he'd join us as well. He agreed. This was all great, but I only had a venue for 30 or 40 people. This was now turning into a flagship event for National Inclusion Week. Luckily, fate took another turn, and it's our main conference centre with room for over 120 people was free. So come the day, I must admit I was slightly worried about whether we'd be able to fill the conference centre. Was there enough interest in the subject? The BBC documentary, How to Break into the Elite, had been broadcast a couple of months before then, which had fueled some interest. And then on the day, the event was packed. It was obviously a subject that means a lot to a lot of people. Again, Brad shared his story. Andy said that despite being at the bank for nearly 30 years, his background was he grew up on a council estate in Sunderland, and he still felt like a fraud being at the bank. That gives you a little bit of a feel for how it can feel to be at the Bank of England. During the Q&A session, Brad made a commitment that our Court of Directors, which is effectively our board, would take a paper on recommendations in the new year. So that was January, February this year. So anyway, how fab is that? We've got commitment from the very top of the bank. And hopefully the other little tale that comes out from this is if you take a bit of a punt sometimes, you can really, really push the agenda a little bit quicker than you might normally. So we had to get ready for our Court of Directors, or preparing court, which sounds like I'm up on a charge, but it's not that at all. So between October and January, we put a lot of work in to come up with something we were proud of. In some ways, coming up with a long-term approach wasn't as complicated as I thought it might be. Why? Because of the amount of interest in the subject, and that we had some baseline data through a completed diversity survey that we carried out in 2018, Amy's research, and SEB data on our early careers entrants. And it's not just our issue, you know it's important for all organisations, which is why it's great that we've been working closely with others to share ideas and develop approaches. To name just a few, we've signed up to the Social Mobility Pledge and engaged to varying degrees with the Financial Conduct Authority, the Mayor's Fund for London, and the Cross-Government Social Mobility Network Steering Group. And we know this isn't a quick fix, which is why our draft strategy looks over a 5-year period. And we fully recognise it will take longer than that to see change fully embed itself. And although it's a 5-year plan, I'm going to talk briefly about what we want to achieve in the short term. It's in 3 parts. First, we need to establish a baseline of SEB makeup at the bank. We're involved in a piece of research carried out by the Bridge Group. If you're into social mobility, then you've probably heard of them. It's a non-profit consultancy that uses research to promote social equality. And this research is looking into the banking and asset management sectors. Taking part means that we will have a baseline of SEB relevant to the bank, but also we'll have an understanding across our sector. Our ultimate aim is that people share information about their backgrounds just as they do about their gender, ethnicity, disability, or sexual orientation, meaning we have a source of data that we can use to track who we're attracting to the bank, and more importantly, the lived experience of colleagues relevant to their background. But we know that gathering data will be a challenge, but we have learned from how we have increased the number of colleagues who share information about other characteristics. We have disclosure rates of around 90% for ethnicity, and approaching 80% for disability, and just over 70% for sexual orientation. We've managed this through targeted approaches with locally led initiatives and a series of stories from colleagues explaining why sharing information is so important. And we aim to take a similar approach for SEB. 2, we want to focus on a specific demographic within the bank, our early careers entrants, as we have base data relevant to that group already. And we have seen the number of universities that we recruit from grow over the last few years, and we've increased the number of available apprenticeships significantly over the last year. And we'll use that information to understand if our efforts to attract people in these cohorts from different backgrounds is working, and perhaps set ourselves goals for the future. Third, we want to do what we can to improve the chances of the younger generation through our work experience programme. But how will we manage this? Initially, we wanted a senior sponsor and a cross-bank working group to drive this agenda and help us deliver what I hope will be an ever-increasingly ambitious programme. I should point out that I've got quite a small team. There's me, I have a diversity lead, a wellbeing lead, a community lead, and an environment lead, and that's it. So engagement with the wider population, specifically through some of our networks, is so important. So as things stand, we've got a working group made up of over 20 volunteers from across the bank. They're involved in 4 work streams, 3 I've mentioned, plus 1 to cover communications. But we haven't got a senior sponsor. Why is that? Well, I had an influx of senior management that wanted to get involved, and I didn't want to choose just one. So instead, I proposed they acted as an informal steering group, who we could go to with our ideas in a more informal environment outside our normal governance. They agreed, and that's what we have in place. And one of the reasons for setting up a cross-bank working group made up of colleagues from all social backgrounds and having senior management involved to drive this work forward is for them to share their stories. As I've mentioned, this is really important, as these stories will help to drive up the number of colleagues willing to share their background, and we'll have a variety of role models across the bank at all levels of the organisation. That's it. We're quite early on in terms of maturity, but without doubt, we've gathered momentum over the last 6 months or so. And that momentum hasn't dimmed with the massive changes we're seeing as a result of COVID-19. Yes, some imminent deliverables have to take place over a longer trajectory, but we're cracking on where we can. What would I say is the biggest challenge? The bank is seen as an elite institution. So first, we need to change people's perceptions of that. And just as importantly, we need to ensure that we have the right environment, moving away from where managers expect polish rather than seeing an individual's potential. So what are the 3 key messages I want to share with you? It's fair to say that none of them are rocket science. Get the buy-in of your board as high up as you can, or a committee as high up as you can. Having the support of our non-executive directors and governors has been invaluable, and support at that level sends out a clear message to the organisation. You won't be able to do this alone, and having support from all levels of the organisation in helping deliver our work and acting as role models will help keep the momentum going and negate some of the challenges we'll face, such as gathering data. And work with other organisations. This is all about collaboration, not competition. Finally, it's going to be a long slog. We're at the start of our work. We set ourselves a pathway that looks not just at what's going on within the bank, but how we might influence generations to come, think differently about the opportunities open to them. So that's it. That's my blurb. I hope you found that informative, and now I think we're going to open it up for a general discussion. And thanks to Minaxa for doing such a cool job as dealing with my slide deck, because I couldn't manage that from my iPad.
The slides, Paul, so apologies for that in advance. But thank you very much. It was absolutely interesting, and I've got quite a lot of questions that have come through here. So the first question is, you mentioned the biggest challenge. How are you changing the perception of the Bank of England? What is it? What are those key steps that you are taking to change the perception?
So a lot of that comes from a couple of things I was talking about before. Well, 3 things I was talking about before. So we go out previous years when we've gone on campus for our graduate recruitment, we've gone to a much wider selection of universities. In fact, we didn't even have any presence at Oxford or Cambridge for the last couple of years because we don't need to. So why put our resources there? Go broader than the Russell Group. Work experience, that really does open the eyes up to younger people, and we have internships as well. And what's been good is that we hear back from people who've come in to work with us for a short time, that it has kind of like broken down the barriers of what they're they're seeing. And I'm sure I mentioned the social mobility pledge. We caught up with Justin Greening, who runs that pledge, and she admitted that she did economics at university, and at the time she wouldn't have considered a job at the bank because it just wouldn't have fitted in with her, with what her group would recognise as being available to her. So it's getting in young, it's going wider, and it's just getting ourselves out there a little bit more. So doing something like this hopefully sort of helps get the message out there that we're a changing organisation.
Fabulous, fabulous. I've got another question here that has just come through. Does the Bank of England have a clear vision of what success looks like by 2025 with all these different initiatives that are taking place? So what does success look like for you in the next few years?
All right, so when I think about what the strategy looks like, the main thing is that, first of all, we've got a proper understanding of what the baseline looks like. Secondly, there is something around the lived experience. So if we, for example, look at our talent management and we see progression going through the organisation, just as we've done some research into what the lived experience in terms of progression has been like for our BAME colleagues, we can look at other sections of the organisation just to see where those trends are, and just to make sure that the opportunities are available to everyone. So already we've started looking at people who present to some of our senior committees, just to get an understanding of who those opportunities go to. So it's very much the lived experience from what you hear about the organisation, but then we'll back it up in different ways in terms of how we are seeing people from different backgrounds progress. I think that's the key thing. The proof of the pudding will be that lived experience, and that's where the inclusive leadership program that I mentioned earlier on is going to be so important, because, as I say, it's fine for us to put all these great initiatives in place in terms of the individual, but unless the people who are making the decisions about those individuals change, then we're on a hiding to nothing, which is why it will take a while for those the way people think to change a little bit. And don't get me wrong, we one of the things we've set out in our strategy is we've got a high level set of metrics, and they're the things we're going to have to drill into over the next sort of year, 18 months.
So data is very important.
Oh yeah, data is. I was going to say data is king, but that's not being very inclusive. Data is king or queen.
Okay, that's interesting. I've got another question here from Niall Copeland, and he says, Paul, you've talked about your engagement work with schools. What age ranges have you targeted? How have you opened the doors to schools, and how have you focused your efforts on creating a program?
Right, so
there's a couple of there.
Yeah, so we go at I'll confess, I'm not sure of the complete demographics in terms of the outreach and education program, because that sits within a different area. I'll concentrate more on the work experience piece, which is the bit that I'm responsible for. So as I say, so we work with some partner organisations to make sure we can bring people in from across London. They're generally the year before taking GCSEs. I should be better at new school. Is that year 11? Year 11 students, and then, like I say, they come in for a week, and they'll be partnered up with a certain area within the bank. Generally, they're given a task, a job to do while they're there. But equally, I mean, the last lot that were in towards the end of last year, they were really lucky. They got an audience with Mark Carney, the governor at the time, who talked about his story. So, I mean, it's great. We had some school children in from Tower Hamlets that had an audience with the governor, and one of them was so good. They asked the question: if you weren't governor of the Bank of England, what would you be? So they had some proper engagement going on there. So that just opens their eyes up to, yeah, these people we might see on television who are making some key decisions in the economy. Yeah, actually, I've now looked them in the eye and asked them a question. So there's something about that lived experience for people.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Paul. I've got another question here. With regards to the steering group, great move. As sponsors means it's not just one person that the responsibility sits on. The question is, given the strong and long Bank of England legacy, is the bank ready for leadership and the challenge and the change?
Well, the fact that I was sat in the room with the Court of Directors, which include Brad Freed, our chair, and the level of engagement, the level of support, and I mentioned I'm non-exec, so one of our, just for a quick example, Frances O'Grady, she's at the TUC, immediately put me in contact with someone at the TUC to talk through some of the things they're doing. So there is support at that level, and that is definitely filtering its way down the organisation. So when I mentioned about people getting in touch with me, I was going on an on-site visit with one of our executive directors. This came up in conversation, and she immediately started sharing her story. I said, "Look, Paul, if you want me to get involved, I'll get involved." So we're pushing against an open door. I've just been overwhelmed with the amount of the level of support, and people are genuine in wanting to push the agenda through. And that became evident when we had the Sam Friedman event. I was looked around the conference centre at who was there, and it was every level of the organisation. We know this stuff doesn't touch on gender or ethnicity. It appeals to everybody. So there's a passion and a drive to get stuff done. And like I say, and that's at all levels of the organisation, which is so important.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Paul. Now I've got another question here from Manisha from Bloomberg. She's asking, which tool are you using to data capture?
So for our grads, we use Rare because they ask questions around social background that go beyond the 4 Cabinet Office questions. So it goes into other details such as around postcode that you grew up in. So we use Rare for our grads, but for the baseline information we're going to go for the 4 Cabinet Office questions, which, as you lot probably know, focus on the type of school attended between 11 and 18, eligibility for free school meals, highest level of education achieved by parents by the time they're 18, and occupation of main household earner. So those are our baseline ones, but we've got richer data for our grad and early careers entrants.
Fabulous. Right, I've got another question as well. You mentioned the importance of having data and it being king or queen. What are the key data drivers for the Bank of England?
I'm going to take a specific example. I touched on around ethnicity. So we've got high disclosure rates around ethnicity, which is great. So what that means is that when it comes to doing staff engagement surveys, we can cut the data to look at that particular demographic. It means that when we're looking, as I touched on the career progression, we've got some rich data in terms of being able to track like for like in terms of white versus non-white, and seeing how the trends go in terms of their careers. So it's being able to use that data, that source data, to inform us in different ways. Not least because we're just looking at we've got ethnicity and gender targets that expire at the end of this year. So we're currently looking at what the new ones will look like. So without having that rich source of data, we're going to be on hiding to nothing in terms of what we might want to achieve post 2020. So yeah, it's that baseline data, and then being able to make sure you can then slice it and dice it, so you get a better feeling of what the organisation looks like. I touched on the cognitive diversity survey. So when we did that included socio-economic backgrounds as well. So that was telling us so it wouldn't just tell us how women are feeling or how men are feeling. It would take it down to the level of, if you're a black woman, you were feeling a particular way in terms of engagement that you were getting across the bank. So we use it in various ways. I mean, lots of organisations are data hungry. The bank probably more than any other, when you think about some of the decisions that we make when it comes to data.
Given that a lot of organisations tend to separate inclusion and sustainability, what led the Bank of England to combine the two roles into one function/team?
Yeah, so this was a decision that was made only so it was made last year and it came into effect last September. It was mainly because when you looked at our CSR agenda more broadly, it was in different places in the organisation. So as I say, we already had well-being, diversity and community within HR, or people and culture as we're now called. And so it just seemed to be a sensible idea in terms of the way, because we'd reacted to the NAO report that came out last year in terms of how we were set up. And so it made sense to put some of the strategic thinking together in terms of CSR, so which is why we brought the environment lead role into my team. And it came apparent really quickly that the way we're set up for each of those 4 strands is really similar. So as I said, we're a really small team, so we rely on our network, but we've also got groups of champions. So for the community, we've got community champions, we've got wellbeing champions, we've got green champions. So all of those functions operate through engagement through staff. So that's where the similarities were, and also bringing those 4 strategies together to come up with an overall inclusion and sustainability just gives a clearer view of what we're up to. And I may add that when it comes to writing our annual report and doing our reporting, it makes things so much more streamlined.
Okay, I've got one other question for you, Paul. Where are we? Here we go. What do you feel are the strengths in terms of diversity, inclusivity of your workforce currently, and what still needs to be done to improve the strengths?
Right, so I'm going to answer it slightly. I'll answer it in a way that works for me. So the strengths would be the fact that there is a recognition that things need to change. They've been evolving hugely since 2013. And then with Andrew Bailey coming in as well, we'll see another shift in what we're doing. So the strengths are that there are people that care passionately about it and want to change things. But equally, we're the type of organisation where some people aren't quite sure about how they can affect change. They want to do the right thing, but they're not sure how to, which is why we bring initiatives like the Inclusive Leadership Programme. Because when you think about that, what we call the sticky middle management, so you've got managers looking up to that level, and you've got directors and executive directors looking down on them with this massive expectation, that group of people. So it's about getting them to just adjust their mindset sometimes in how they think and how they make those decisions. So the strength is a huge groundswell of people wanting to do the right thing. The second piece is just making that become a reality, and that's not unique. I mean, some of the challenges we've got, I touched on career progression and retention. That's not unique to us, which is why it's so important that when we do the stuff that we do work really closely with other organisations. So we're doing that not just on social background. With the targets work we're doing, earlier this year we had a round table with some of our partner organisations, some public sector organisations and some private sector organisations, just to find out what was going on there. So I've gone off track slightly, but so the strength is, yes, we need to change. The weakness is everybody being sure what their part is that they have to play and being able to, feeling equipped to be able to play it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Another question: what percentage of disclosure rates are you expecting / hoping for when it comes to SEB data collection? You said you got 70 to 90% for sexual orientation, disability, and ethnicity. So, what kind of rates are you expecting?
If we get, so when we did the cognitive diversity survey back in 2018, we managed around 50%, which was a really good response rate for that type of survey. So I'm going to hedge my bets and go, if we can get between 50 and 70, I'll be happy. And I'm really hoping, because Meenakshi told me to say this before, so I'm really hoping that the storytelling helps, because a phrase I've picked up from earlier this year is, storytelling is data with soul. So we're hoping that by telling our stories, we'll get the soul bit, but then we'll get people to actually start sharing the information about themselves. So yeah, if I can get around 60%, I think that'd be a really good start.
Okay, another question here on role models. Actually, how important is it to have role models in not just Bank of England, but any organisation and from different backgrounds?
Yeah. So this is so important. And there's something around where you're having role models, is that the people are sharing their vulnerabilities as much as their strengths. If I go back to Amy's story, how she couldn't find a female role model that she was looking for. If some of our senior management had shared their stories, she would have found people immediately. But we don't tend to share that sort of information. We're very happy to share what degree we got 30 years ago, whereas we're less likely to share information about struggles we've had to get to where we are, or the way we've just smashed through barriers. And I think that's the element of the role models that I want to try and bring through from the socio economic work that we're doing, rather than just a gay man looking to another gay man as being a role model, or a black girl looking to a black woman as a role model. Ultimately, I'd love to get away from that, where anybody can be anybody's role model. It's all down to you as an individual and what rocks your boat.
Thank you, Paul, for that. Another question: how are you going to prioritise all the different aspects of diversity and inclusion that you're going to be covering for the next 5 years? Where do you start, and what is important to you? So, with all the different disguises of diversity and inclusion, how do you prioritise? Is it gender that comes first? Is it race? Is it ethnicity? Is it LGBT? How do you prioritise this as a bank?
Different ways. So we've got, if I think about the engagement we have with our senior executives, there's almost kind of like a rolling agenda in terms of what we take up there. So 1 month, for example, we might go with our faith networks, so we can give an update on what's going on there. The next month, it could be our disability and LGBT plus network. While we're talking, and then alongside that, we'll talk about staff engagement. So we have a rolling agenda. Because what I really try hard to do is not for people not to think that any one aspect is more important than another. We had a Bain Task Force town hall not so long ago, and part of that we were trying to bring out the intersectionality point, and the feedback was really interesting. That some people felt, because we started bringing gender into the conversation, that we were trying to shift away from BAME issues, and that's not the point. What we're trying to do is say that within those groups there are going to be different challenges. So there's in terms of what's important, there's also something about educating people. So I'm in the middle of all of this stuff. So it's what I live and breathe. Whereas there are people who rightly can only see what they know. So there needs to be that education piece, that when we talk about ethnicity, we will bring in other aspects of different backgrounds, because they bring different nuances to what we need to do in terms of shifting the dial. So in terms of prioritization, it's a rolling agenda, trying not to focus on one versus another, which brings its own challenges. And then, like I said, at the moment, there's been a huge increase in focus on the well-being and community aspects. And it's how we, I say we're learning lessons about what we want to do when this is all over. And so we'll see about how we can just maintain some of those different aspects of D&I that we're seeing as a result of what's going on with the coronavirus. So you can tell I'm getting more excited because my arms are flailing around more than ever.
No, that's absolutely fine. And you mentioned the ERG groups earlier, Paul.
Yeah.
How important is it to the bank to have the ERG groups, and what type of ERG groups do you have, and what is their key role within the business?
Right. So we've got 12 networks. Everything from ethnicity, gender, LGBTQ+, right the way through to we've got an external recruits network, which is all about people who are new to the bank, and so we know about their experiences because that's vital, and that helps with other elements of what we've got going on. There's carers network, parents network. We've got the latest one we've got is people who served. So and that's been invaluable at the moment. So we had some work we were doing around volunteering and for reservists that you might have heard came out a few weeks ago. And so we were able to tap into that network to find out how best to engage with that population of people in the organisation. So they're there to work. I think, well, okay, so in recent times, it's been very much about us working collaboratively with the networks, because the networks can't work without us and we can't work without the network. So it's very much about collaboration. And it's very much about working with them to decide on what's needed doing. So they'll have their own agendas that we'll know what's going on, but equally they'll support us when we're trying to drive stuff through. So it's collaborative, but without us being what's the word I'm looking for? Giving them free rein to do some of the stuff they want to do. It's very much more than social activities. It's very much in terms of helping the bank to become the kind of organisation it wants to be. So they're hugely empowered. They all have senior sponsors. So when I think about our disability network, Victoria Cleland, who's our chief cashier, you've got her name written on your banknotes. She's a senior sponsor for disability. She does a huge amount in terms of supporting that network, and was a key driver in signing up to the valuable 500 last year. So so the networks have a role, but also the senior sponsors they have a role to play as well.
Thank you for that, Paul. I've got another question for you. Regarding board level support, most organisations will have an exec sponsor at boardroom level. The Bank of England is quite unique in the sense that you don't. What is your view on not having an exec sponsor at boardroom level?
Well, in some ways we do, and we do, because our chief operating officer, Jo Place, she sits on our board of our court of directors, and she's responsible. She's got ultimate responsibility. Well, the governor has ultimate responsibility, but Jo is the person who, this is her day-to-day role in terms of what the people agenda looks like. So yeah, we've got that representation there, I'd say.
Wonderful. So I think we've covered quite a bit today, and I think what we're kind of walking away with today is, storytelling is important, outreach is very important, having role models within our organisation is really important. Are there, from today's session, Paul, are there a couple of key takeaways that you would like to share with everyone that's listening in, and dialing in today, that you can take away from today's session? Your top three takeaways.
So there were 3 takeaways that I'd mentioned as part of the presentation. I'll layer one more on, and that is about when you see an opportunity to change stuff, grab it with both hands and go with it. When I think about the strides that we've taken around social background. A lot of that is because we saw opportunities to do things, and that was from Amy, the grad, doing her research, to bringing Sam Friedman in as an external person who's got great credibility in this field to come and talk to us, bringing our chair in, bringing our chief economist. So it's all about seizing those opportunities to drive through what you need to do. So that's what I say. Be bold, be brave. And that's not just the people who are listening in here, it's anybody across the organisation. So the momentum, really, you could say, started from Amy, the graduate. So think about that. There's one graduate has helped to drive the agenda at the Bank of England hugely over the last 6 months. So yeah, be bold, take a chance.
Thank you. And a very big question to kind of end on. How is the bank dealing with COVID-19?
Well, so crikey, yes. Well, that's a very big question. So obviously we need to keep the markets going. We need to keep payment systems going. So there's been some incredible work done by colleagues there, and there have been some of those critical roles that previously we haven't been able to do from outside the bank, that we are now colleagues are able to do it from home. So there's been a huge advance in that technology side of things. So there's this like I say, keeping the markets going. We've still got to produce notes, so keeping that side of things going. So there's some of those critical functions. Our supervisors, and how, especially the ones who deal with banks that are overseas. So we've not been able to fly out for visits. So we're having to rely more on technology like this to engage. So, and then there's so much reaction right the way through to. We've just recently, we've got the site I mentioned in Essex that has got a couple of beehives. We had our first harvest of honey. Let me go with this one next. I'll get there in a second.
No,
and then last year we had a new hive set up at Threadneedle Street. But the volunteers who were the beekeepers at the bank as part of their in extra to their day job, they're not able to go and check on the bees every day, and we didn't want to expose those people to coming into town just for the bees. So we took a decision to move those bees to Debden, where there are people to look after them. So it's everything from the really big, meaty, keeping the economy going, right the way through to what we're doing in that biodiversity space. So there's so much in between. It's a huge question. I could probably talk for half an hour and barely touch the surface of it.
You have an amazing role at the Bank of England. Very exciting.
Oh yeah, so a few people said to me, Paul, you've got the best job at the Bank of England. I'm like, yes, I know. I think Mark Carney at the time might disagree with you, but yeah, I'm really fortunate, really fortunate.
Well, I think we're coming up to 4 o'clock, and that comes to almost to the end of our session. So we'd like to thank Paul for joining us today, and thank you all for being such great participants. We will be back again next week. Further announcements to be made in the next day or two. Should you have any more questions for Paul, please do drop me an email or send it via LinkedIn directly to Paul. He is on LinkedIn. We shall see you next week. So thank you very much for joining us.
Bye.